Well, we're going to talk about hats today, and I have to first point out Johannes Mikkelsen. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's the hat man. He's out of Vermont, I believe it is, and he says he originated the wood hat. Maybe he did, I don't know, but he certainly is the master at it. And everything I know about making hats, I learned from him. He's got a video out turning a Range Rider hat, it's called, and I got a copy of that, and I've watched that I don't know how many times, but I watched it 3 or 4 times before I even started trying to make a hat, and I keep going back to that and re-watching. In fact, I watched it Friday just to refresh myself on some things. But so if you really want to know how to make a hat, go back to him. He also puts on classes out at his place in Vermont, and my goal someday is to get out there to one of his classes to really find out how to do them. But he's the master, so most of what I learned from him. I will show you how I do it and tell you some of what he might do different than the way I do it. Some of the things he does, it didn't work for me, and so on. So there's not, like in any wood turning, there's always more than one way to do things, and do whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever works for you. You know, of course, be safe while you're doing it. Now, when you want to make a hat, a wood hat, a full-size wood hat, there's a couple requirements. One, the hat needs to be somewhere in the range of about 16 inches in diameter. So that means this is about as small lathe as you can use. Anything smaller and you're not going to be able to make a full-size hat. Now, if you don't want to make a full-size hat, you can make a smaller one. You can make a half size or a quarter size or an even smaller size. You can make different size hats, and they're basically the same way, but full size, you need a full-size lathe. And then the other thing that you need is a big piece of wood, and that's probably the biggest challenge of all, is to get a piece of wood big enough to turn, because this has, if you want the brim to bend, it's got to be as fresh green wood as you can get, like, you know, cut it down and start turning, because if it's been down for a while, it's going to start drying, and once it dries, then it's not going to want to bend. And the bending part, I'm sure any of you have turned at all know, wood tends to want to warp anyway, and all you're really doing is guiding the warpage. You're going to just let it warp the way, kind of the way it wants to warp, but you're going to kind of show it the way you want it to go. So greener the wood, the more it's going to warp, and the easier it's going to be to turn. So I don't make a lot of hats because it's hard to find wood. I got lucky this year. A neighbor across the street had a big, huge maple that came down. Well, it got hit by lightning, and so they had to take it down. But that thing was, you know, like this big around. So when they were cutting it up, I asked the guy that was cutting it if he'd leave me a few pieces, and he did. And that's what this is. So I was able to get, I got 3 big pieces, so I can cut them in half, and I get 6 hats out of it. But it's the big thing is to find big enough wood. Has any of you made a hat before? Any of you turned a hat before? Okay. Then the next thing, if you're making hats, you want them to be as thin as possible. And so when you're starting out, if you think you might want to make a hat, but you're not sure if you can do it, I would recommend the first thing you do is just practice making very thin bowls. Just because you want to be, I mean, Johannes he goes by. Originally he was doing 3/16 inch thick. And then when I talked to him on the phone a while back, he said, well, I've changed that. Now I'm doing 3/32. So, I mean, that's thin. 3/16, I'm still a little, I try for like 1/4 inch and figure I'll sand the other 1/16 of an inch maybe, but that's thin enough. You don't have to be that thin. But so if you're going to make a hat, it's practice trying to turn thin, because that's really the name of the game. But the other thing, a hat is nothing more than just another shape of a bowl. I mean, if you really look at them, I mean, you take one like this, you know, all you're doing is turning a bowl that looks like this. So if you can turn that and turn it thin, you got a hat. So it's important to be able to turn thin. So I won't say that this is for, it's certainly not for beginners, but if you can turn decent bowls and halfway thin, you can turn a hat. I also need to put in a disclaimer. Not everyone turns out. Sometimes, now that's thin, but it got too thin, and so I don't forget, you know, this is on the side here. This is your stress point right along here. And so you got to be a little careful of that area when you're turning. You might leave just a little extra wood there than what the rest of your brim is and stuff, because that's, if you get that too thin, it's going to crack for sure. And I've had them crack. There's a couple there. I won't tell you which ones that have been cracked and glued back together, and most people can't tell the difference, but they will crack. One thing you can do, this I got from Hannes too, is he made a template. So when you're looking at logs, you can just set this on the log and see if you got enough, big enough log to fit this. And this, it's 6 inches wide at the top, 16 at the bottom, and 8 inches high. So that would give you your basic, that's kind of your minimum size to get a full-size hat. If you got to have at least that much wood to get a full-size hat. Then the other question that always comes up is, well, how big do I make the hat to fit my head? Of course, everybody's head's different. Most people do not have round heads. They have kind of oval-shaped, and you know, we're turning round, so how do you get it oval? Well, part of the oval comes from the bending, but still, you know, what size works for you? And you can measure a hat you have at home if you have a stiff one. It doesn't work on a baseball cap that stretches too easy. But the other way you can do it is to take one of these, whatever they're called, flexor things, but just wrap it around your head and fit it. Make it fit down on your ears. Okay, there's the shape of my head. And then if you take a piece of paper, trace that out. Now I've got, this is the size head I've got. And then if I measure, you know, these two dimensions and basically average them, that gives you about the size of the oval that you're going to need. Now I would tend to go a little heavy on this dimension. So in this case, I am at 6.5 and 7.5. So, you know, average it, you got 7. But for me, just by trial and error, I found I need about a 7.25 hole. Give yourself a little extra room there because it's not going to bend the whole 1/2 inch shape. So for me, a 7.25 hole will mold itself to what would fit me. Now, I know most of you don't have one of these measuring devices. So what I thought I'd do, if anybody's up to it, I've got paper, I got a pencil, and I've got this. So I'll pass it around. If you want to, you know, measure your head, draw it out on the paper, then you can take it home and you've got something to work with so you know what size to make your head. So go ahead, don't be embarrassed. But otherwise it's pretty hard to get the true dimension without something like that. So that's, now if you watch Hannes's video, he goes into a very long, elaborate equation of calculations that he does, and to me it doesn't have to be that complicated. The other thing, he does the outside first, and so his part of his calculation is allowing for the thickness of the wood and everything else and expansion and so on. And I do the inside first, so I get the hole the right size first, and then I work on the rest of it. So the other thing somebody asked me when I came this morning, says, everybody wants to know how you're going to turn a hat in an hour and a half. And I said, I'm not. I cannot turn a hat in an hour and a half, even at home. It takes probably 3 to 5 hours to make a hat, depending on how much sanding and stuff you do along the way. And that's starting from a half of a log. So in the sake of time, I got it to this point already. This probably saved me a half hour to an hour, depending on the piece of wood. One of the challenges is you cut it as big as you can, and then you try to put it on the lathe, and it catches, and so it doesn't quite, you can't spin it. And just a little tip, I found an electric planer is perfect for this kind of work. You got a high spot where it catches, just run that planer across it until you get it down. Otherwise, I used to have to take it off, back to the bandsaw, cut a little bit, put it back on, try it again, back to the bandsaw, and it took forever. Planer saves you having to take it on and off all the time. So that's a little help too. But basically, this piece right now is about 8 inches around, and this is as big around as I could get the piece of wood. And then you want about, well, we said 6 inches plus. Remember, I got a faceplate with screws, so I need that room in here too. So 7 to 8 inches wide here is probably good to start with.
So your 8 inches then is going to make your 7 1/4?
Yeah.
One of ovals?
Yeah. Because even I can only want about a 1/4 inch thickness to it. So it'll be, and this out here is a little thicker than 8 probably anyway. So I assume everybody can get a piece of wood down to this shape. So that's where we're going to start it, okay? Any other questions? All right, so the next thing, or the first thing that I do to get this point is I want to get my outside brim from this side the way I want it. And when you do the brim, you don't want to make it straight across. You actually want, I'll do it here. Let's see. Okay, there's your piece of wood. So here's your hole for your head. Now, rather than making this straight across, and Hannes gives you the dimensions, he does, I think it's like a couple inches at a 15-degree angle, and then a few more inches at another angle, and the top to the bottom is 3/16 and all this measuring stuff. So if you really want all the technical stuff, get his video. But basically what you do is you come out at a slight angle here and then come back up to meet your edge. So you've got kind of a cup to it, or a dip in there. And that gives you a little bit of a bend already, and then as it bends up around, you've already got some of that extra bend to it. So that's what I'm going to do first. And again, I'm not going to be able to do everything, so I'll just do a little bit to show you kind of what I'm working on. Now the other thing I should do before I get much further, I just kind of, a general shape here, and then I want to get my center to be the size that I want it. And you can use the calipers, or you can just kind of check it out to see where you're at. Okay, I'm right on 7 1/4 right now. So I'm going to deepen that just a little bit more. So now I know where my inside is. And the other thing, if you don't know what size head to make, you can hollow this out and put it on your head and see how it fits. Don't be afraid to try it. So now that I know where that is, now I can shape my brim. Okay, so that's, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's a rounded edge here. And I think that should be pretty close.
And that's why again?
As far as,
Why the concave?
just because when you're bending and you want it to look more bent,
Gotcha.
you get more shape. Otherwise, it's going to look like that instead of like that. I'm going to just clean out some of this while I'm here. And I like to go in at least an inch or so, because then I know where my brim and my band is going to be. This band here sticks out just a little bit, and so that's the thickest part, and I need to know where that's going to be before I go to the inside. So, and if you have a big lathe, it's a lot easier because then you can just slide your banjo back and forth, but since this is such a tight fit, I have to keep taking it off. And moving the banjo back to get to the other side. Okay, and so now I'm going to work on this brim and take all of this off to get it down to how thick I want it here. Makes a lot of shavings. When you start getting thin, it's a good idea to use a pair of calipers to measure your thickness, and you should be able, of course, to set it wherever you want and slide it all the way down. No, I'm not there yet, but And this is one place I'll save some time. I'm not going to do this as thin as I normally would, but the idea is you want to be able to run your caliper, all the way through here and have an even thickness. That's pretty thick right now, but to get it down as thin as you want. And what I find is sometimes I'll do as much as I can on this inside, and then I might go back to the outside to finish it because it's a lot easier for me to be delicate out here than it is to try and do it on the inside. So you kind of can work your way both sides if you want. Try to keep your shape here, but do as much as you can maybe on the inside, and then if you need to refine it, just a light touch on the outside. It's sometimes easier to work that way. The other thing your calipers will do is by using them down in here, it shows you where you're at compared to the edge of your where your head's going to be, the inside edge. And like in this case, I got 3/4 inch or more there, so I know I've got to go that much further, take that much more off of this part. So I'm going to take that down a little bit more. Okay, so now I may be a 1/2 inch, and if I wanted to take, if I was really doing this, I'd take the time to keep working my way down until I got probably about 1/4 inch here is all the thickness that I want to leave. So by using your calipers, you can also tell how far down here you want to go. But again, work this, get this thin, and get it as far down as you want to go. Maybe leave a little extra right on this joint here, because where it turns, that's where the critical point is, where it's going to want to break the easiest. So you can leave that just a little bit thicker there. And then you need to sand the brim now before you go any further, because it's going to start bending right away. And the sooner you can get it sanded and finished, the better off you're going to be. You get it finished, get it sanded, and then you can leave it alone and not go back to it. Now, Hannes puts a light coat of finish on it at this point to slow down the drying effect, and a lacquer, I think, is what he uses, and just to have a coat on it for the time being. So, any questions on that?
Any secrets to sanding that wet of wood? What do you use?
Well, and I meant to bring it, I forgot to bring it. And I've never seen anybody else use it. Menards has a 5 1/4 sanding disc with a hook and loop. I just get one of those, and I use that sandpaper and a drill to do all my sanding, power sanding. And then where at the inside, because that's flat and solid, so it helps take any rough edges out. But on the inside, it doesn't work as well when it's flat. So I took and ground off, or turned off, about 1 inch of the padding on the back, of the solid part of the back, so that then you got a little flex on the outside, and then you can make that curve a little easier. But I find I power sand everything nowadays.
Regular sandpaper?
Yeah, I usually, and 60 grit works just as well as, and if you're like me, sometimes you need 60 grit. And when you're getting super thin, turning thin is, at least to me, is, yeah, okay, I made it this time, so next time I get a little braver and I make it a little thinner, and eventually I get too thin and it breaks or you go through or something. So then I back off and go thicker again, and you just kind of go back and forth. Like I said before, sometimes I'll maybe do it down to 1/4 inch and then sand the last 1/16 of an inch rather than trying to turn the 1/16 when it's so thin and at that point. Now you also, once you get it thin, probably less than 1/4 inch, around 1/4 inch, you'll start hearing the difference in the wood. So that's something you kind of can train your ear for and be listening for, and you can kind of tell just by hearing, by the sound, that you're getting pretty thin. But yeah, any sanding when it's wet like this, you're gonna kink up your sandpaper, so you just have to have a wire brush and just run the drill and hold the brush against it and get all that off, and then go back at it again until it dries.
But if you got it that thin, you know, if you were down that thin, and you just let that thing run a while, it kind of dries itself, you know.
It will some, yeah. The other thing I've seen people do is take an air hose and spray it. But remember, you don't want it dry.
Right.
If you get it dry, it's not going to bend. So you're fighting, you know, dry enough to sand, but not too dry to bend.
That's why the 60 grit works better.
Yeah. I'm not ashamed to use it. All right. So assuming this was as thin as we were going to make it, the next thing I do is to do the outside basic shape the way I want it. And on the outside, yeah, let me go to the next page here. To do the head shape, you generally, well, you want to be straight for like maybe an inch or so, and then you can just slightly come in and then kind of go straight or almost back out again, almost like that. Maybe this is a little exaggerated, but this is more smooth probably, so you don't notice can't tell there's a breaking point there. You want it smooth, and then on the top, while I'm at it, like Hannes, he does his, looks like this, with a little dip in the top. Mine tend to be more straight across, maybe a little bit of dip, sometimes a little dip, sometimes a little. Just depends on how brave I am when I get to that point. When you get that far, you don't want to mess it up by going through the top. So I tend to leave it a little thicker and not push my luck. But anyway, and then this up here, somewhere around 5-6 inches. So you're going from, well, if I'm doing 7 1/4, this is about 7 3/4 on the outside, close to 8. To about 6, and that's one place. These lathes come with a 6-inch faceplate, and when I do my beginning classes, I tell people these things are worthless. You don't need them. You don't need anything this big. This is one place they work nice because it's also your sizing gauge, because you know what size this is, 6-inch. So if I go from this size to the size I got here already, I'm pretty much in the right shape. So I'm going to shape the outside somewhat. I switch tool rests here and go to a shorter one that I can get in there with. Now the other thing, kind of the next thing, before I get too far on that shape, is I want to get this band the way I want it. And I want that to be flat and somewhere a little over an inch to 1 1/8, 1 1/4, maybe be wide, but somewhere around that size. So I want to flatten that out. And then get it as smooth as possible. And at this point, I get my transition edge here too to be, smooth. But before I go any further, I would sand that band and get that as smooth as I can. Get a finish sand. because if you want to get the dark brim, you got to do it now before it bends anymore or warps. And the way you do that, and this is rough, so it may not work very well, but I'll try it, is you actually burn it with a piece of wood. This is cocobolo. I just bought a pin blank and cut it in a little strip, because you use the side edge. You don't hold it this way, you hold it this way, and you want a good edge. The other thing, you should have a fresh edge, so because it's been burned from before, so use a rasp or something to freshen up that edge a little bit. And then you want to run your lathe a little faster than you normally would. Hana says 700 RPM. The other day I did it at like 20. I put it on the high speed and did like 2200 RPM. And I burned it enough that I got my smoke detector set off. So we'll give it a whirl here and see if it'll work on this rough wood and wet wood. You just hold it up there till it starts burning. I think you can see that it's gotten darker at least.
Jim, in this room we have sprinklers. So,
all right.
Don't push it too far.
Okay.
We may need a shower.
I won't do it anymore. That was all I was going to do anyway. But you see what happens. It's not even right now, but you can get the idea anyhow. And like I said, now's the time to do that, because if you wait any longer, once you get it hollowed out, then it starts warping, and you're not going to get it even all the way around. So
Do you put a finish on that fan then when you're done?
you don't have to. I mean, so then I'll finish the outside pretty much the way I want it. And I'm not gonna, not go through all the detail for time's sake, but basically, get that shape. And if I were really doing it, I would smooth it out, get it as good good as I could on the lathe with the tools. Then I would maybe use like a 60 or up to a 120 grit sandpaper. But I may have to come back to that, so don't get too carried away with how smooth the finish it is yet, because when I do the inside, sometimes I don't push my luck on the inside. I'd rather do a real fine layer on the outside, so I'll go back to the outside and take a little more off. It just depends on how comfortable you are with what you're doing and so on. So then the other thing I will do at this point, before I go any further, is I like to mark the top of my hat so I know where I'm at here. 4 to 5 inches works fine. You can see some of them are a little taller, some are a little shorter. It's just kind of whatever you feel like, but I'll go about 4 inches here. And I just give that enough that I know where I'm going to end up, how far on the inside I dare go. Okay, then I have to take my hat off.
4 inches from the brim or 4 inches from the band?
The brim. But that's not a magic number either. You can be 4 or 5, 4.5. Depends on the kind of hat you're doing, for one thing. The range rider, they call it, tends to be a little taller. Some of the cowboy hats aren't as tall.
Have you ever done a 20-gallon one?
No, I haven't. Or a top hat or something like that that would be real tall. Okay, so now I'm going to hollow out the inside. And I don't know if I'll do it all or not. I'll do some of it. How are we doing?
We got a lot, man.
Okay. Before I get too far, I want to check my size here. Now, when I was first making these, all I had was these little calipers. Well, you can't get around the corner with them. So then I had a pair of these, and they work okay. You can get around the corner, and you can do pretty well with them. But Hannes sells his own calipers. Now, these are man's calipers. If you really want to know where you're at, these babies will go right in there and wherever you want to go with them. But this will give me, again, it'll give me two things. It'll tell me how thick I am, but it'll also show me how far in I am. And so I can gauge how close I'm getting to that edge by how far in these go. Because when I'm hitting on the inside, I can see where I am on the outside. And so, well, like in this case, if I open it more, and that's about, if you can see that, that's how far I am right now. Thickness-wise, the band, of course, is going to be thicker than the rest of the hat. So you're going to have to set the thickness for what the band is. And beyond that, you can't tell exactly, except you can see how much gap there is between the wood and the caliper. Now, the other thing you can do, well, let me take a little more wood out of here first, then I'll do that. I know, okay. I was trying to figure why it seemed like I didn't have much room here, but this thing is way over. Usually I have mine out on the end. Okay. Now, when you're cutting, normal wisdom on a bow is you go this way. But when you're working on that edge, I find it sometimes easier to come back this way and come out this way. And I'm cutting on this lower edge, so I'm kind of dragging it. And I've got it tipped to that angle, so I'm, just scraping really. So you can, measure as you go. And I'm thick right now, but at least you can see I'm getting there. in the interest of time, I won't bother going the rest of the way. But you can use these. The other thing you can do, which works real well sometimes, again, it depends on how brave you are, is to use a light. And I don't know if some of you have maybe done this or seen it. It's kind of neat. And you got to be careful, though, because I've had sometimes when the light's not that bright and all of a sudden it gets really bright. And if you watch Hannes's video, he's got probably that glowing red light, and he's still taking more off, and I have never found it to be that way. But I can't do it here because it's too thick, but I'll use this hat. Can somebody hit a light switch someplace? I'll show you what this looks like if you're... Like when you're working on the inside, here, if I'm working on the inside, I put my light down on the side here and shine it on the outside. And see how that shows up? That's what you would see. And once you see it, to me, when I see a light at all, it's time to stop. Like I said, though, when Hannes is doing it, see how thin that is up on top and how yellow that light is? But if you noticed, the side grain here is no light there at all. So, again, it depends how brave you are.
If you put a 300-watt light bulb in, it'd be also thin.
Yeah. And it also works on the brim, too, if you want to go that route. So when you're doing the brim, you can actually, hold the light against it and see how you're doing. So
Would that work with like a walnut? Or not?
if you get it thin enough, but I don't think it'll work as well. Yeah, you can turn the lights back on. If you watch Hannes's video, I mean, that's what he does everything by. And like I said, he's have that bright light like in the middle, and he's still taking more off. I can't go that far. One of these days, I'm going to try to really go thin and see if I can keep it. Well, the problem is after you got 3 or 4 hours in it, you get to the top. Do I really want to take that big a risk for that last little bit? And I usually chicken out and say, let's leave it a little thicker. But yeah. Okay, so assume we got the inside to match the outside. Okay, we're thin. We can see the light through it. Everything's cool there. Then what do you do on the top? Well, there's a couple ways of attacking that. And again, I have to switch back. And what I usually do is do as much as I can from the outside. And so I will clear away as much of this scrap wood out here as I can so I can at least get my corner and get a start on the top from out here. So I'll do a little bit of that. So then at this point, I would kind of maybe work my way back and forth between the inside and the outside, kind of get the outside shape the way I want it, and then go on the inside and try to thin it out as much as I dare. and then maybe go back to the outside and take a little more off. At that point, you can, and these lights with the magnet are really nice. You can put it right down on your lathe and stick it inside like that. And you can see that corner, you can tell where you are on that edge, and if you're getting too thin, you start seeing light there, then it's time to stop. Leave well enough alone is one of my turning mottos. Don't get carried away. And so try to get that thin as much as you dare and get that, finish shaping this edge. If you want to put that little swale in there, you can do that from the outside here now. So then you get that much done, and then sand everything you can reach here on the outside and the inside. You can sand it all from here. Once you've got it all sanded, then I would part it off. Just take your parting tool and part it off right across, straight across. The one thing, I don't know, some of you that have turned a lot of bowls, maybe you know this, but a lot of times when you're parting, you get down to that last little bit, and you keep going until it actually parts, and a little bit of the side comes with it. Well, when you're real thin on that side, a lot of bit comes with it. So I tend to get down to maybe even 3/4 inch or so, and then take a saw and saw the rest. Because, this is pretty thin and pretty brittle, and it's real easy if you try to turn that last part to take some of the top hat with you. There's one of the hats has you can see it where it got glued back together on top because it come apart like that. So I would, like I said, you got that much time into it, you're so close to having it done, you don't want to mess up then. So I would use a handsaw and just saw it off. Then I know I didn't lose anything. Okay, now I won't bother doing that on this one. So, while it's still on here?
No, when you
want to take it off? I'll show you that. That's how to finish the top. That's the next piece. So, any questions on to that point? You follow what? And again, do what works for you. Try it different ways. Some people, when Hannes does it, he does the whole outside, and then he does the inside. And I find it easier to go back and forth and pieces at a time and work my way down. But you do it however works for you. There's no right or wrong. Okay, now so we cut this off. We got everything done except the top. Now how are we going to do the top? Well, there are several ways you can do it. What Hannes developed, and I find works real well, is he makes a jam chuck that looks like this. And on a faceplate, it's this one, my segmented turning. I did a segmented piece, and then I put neoprene over top of it. And by using that, I'll use this one. Then you can just jam that on there. And, when you take it off the lathe, this one, you hopefully still have your center marked on the top of it. So you can use the tailstock. At that point, I would put the tailstock in, run it up against it, just to line it up, and just to make sure my center is in the center to get it lined up. But again, be careful because this is thin, so you don't want to crank this thing for all it's worth, and you don't want to jam this point in there and split it. So just enough to touch it to keep it in line so you can get this the way you want it. You can do that, put it on like this, and you can turn most of the top, get it all done, sand it, and then just have that little nib in the center to carve off, sand off, however you want to get it off. Now what Hannes came up with which works pretty well, is that he puts the light on the inside. And this is regular lamp rod. We got a bearing on this end, and we got a bearing on the other end. And then this piece here was something I had somewhere around the house that I worked well, and I adapted it to fit here. But the idea is you run this, your jam chuck has a hole down through the center of it. Take this stuff all off. Then you thread or stuff this cord down through that hole. Oh, and I didn't show you. This has a recess in the bottom. Can you see that? That's the size of the of this bearing. Okay, so this bearing on this end will fit in that hole. So you stick that through. I've got one on that end. And then put one on the other end. And this cup kind of thing just kind of holds it centered. And then put the bearing on. And put the nut on to hold the bearing in place. Okay, now, just a little safety tip. Before you go any further, try this and make sure it's going to work. The one critical piece, and this is in the don't ask me how I know this category, you got to put a pair of vice grips on this thing so that it won't rotate. Because if it rotates, you're going to twist your cord till it pulls out. But by putting that on there, it will keep the, and you can see the bulb here, it's not moving. Okay. Okay, once you get that far, and this is probably not OSHA approved. And if somebody, I don't know, any electrician folks have a better idea how to do this, something that would be legal, I'd like to hear it, because I don't know any other way. What do they call it?
They're just like car connectors, male and female.
Well, they fit through the hole in the lathe, though.
Sure.
Okay. That's the problem with a lot of stuff is.
Make one like an inch longer than the other, so they're staggered.
Okay. I'll have to try that, because it'd probably be quicker too, but this works, and yeah, right. Where? Oh, there it is. I won't run this that much today anyway, but.
That's a standard heavy-duty extension cord also?
Yeah. Yeah, 3-prong the whole bit. Okay, now the next thing, yeah, right, okay. I forgot to, I didn't turn it on before I put it in there. There. Can you reach it?
I'm on the wrong side.
You're on. It might, I got it, maybe I might have to go one more time. Yeah, it's a 3-way switch. There we go. Okay. So now, when Hannes does it, he'll set it up, turn the bulb off, do as much as you can without it, like I showed you before. Use the tailstock, do it, and then only use the bulb when you're almost there, because the bulb, I mean, this is, regular fluorescent bulb will get hot, and it's going to start drying your wood, so you don't want to use any more than you have to. You can use the new cool bulbs, and they're okay. And he says he uses just a 60-watt bulb, so you don't have to have a big floodlight. But as you can see, hopefully, you can see the light through there. And when you start seeing light, you're thin. So, and even if you don't put the whole thing in there, this jam chuck sure works nice for holding that while you're trying to do the top. The other way I have done the top is to those sanding discs I told you about before. Rather than trying to put the hat on the lathe and hold the sanding disc in the drill, I'll use a Jacobs chuck and put the sanding disc on the lathe and hold the hat and sand it that way. I mean, that works fine too. So just whatever you got. We got a little bit of time left. Let me, I'll talk a little bit about some of these other things. Oh, the bending. I almost forgot. Okay, so now that you got your hat, and basically it looks like this. Because this is one I did out of dry wood for a demo. I didn't have any wet wood, so I did it. And that's what happens. The brim doesn't move, okay? But if I was going to bend it, and there are different ways of bending it, but this is Hannes's deal. It works really well. What you do is you put your hat in, and of course you want your grain going this way because you're going to bend with the grain. So we got to get that straight. There we go. And this, if you can see it, it has kind of oval shape to it with some padding on it. And that helps keep things symmetrical. And the idea of that is that when you tighten this, you're squishing the hat part, the head part. And but to do that, you take this kind of a deal. And there's no magic to where you put this, but somewhere up here, get it fairly even. And then you just tighten these up, snug as you can get them with your fingers usually. Don't tighten them with a wrench, because otherwise you get too tight and you'll crack something. But usually if you just tighten them as tight as you can with your fingers, it's tight enough. Then the next thing you want to do is use what Hannes calls Big Red, these big rubber bands. And you can put a couple of them together. And then you string them up and over and back down. And you can put, I'd put at least three, one in the center and one to each side. On the one I have at home, I've got another one of these at home that I've got a hat in right now, but I put screws in near the outside so I have something to fasten to. So you can, run them like that. You can also, I've used an S-hook to run them around and under into the middle. Just put an S-hook on them to hold them together. Or initially, the reason this chain is on here is when I first did it, I didn't have the rubber bands, so I just used a bungee cord around here, and then hooked it on this chain, and then as it bent, I just move it down a link as it went. Whatever works. I did this demo for our club down in Platteville, and so then the challenge for the next month was to everybody make a hat. So one guy did, and he said he put his between two sawhorses, and then just clamped them together with whatever kind of clamps you got, just as something to pull that together. So, you know, you can use your imagination. Some use those wooden, what do they call with the big crank, double crank things, you know. Use those on there. And people say, well, how much do you put on there? How tight do you go? Well, a little less than when you hear the crack. I have had where I've done all this. I've walked away and I got, you know, halfway across the room and all of a sudden, crack. And I thought, oh, that don't sound good. I knew what would happen. What had happened? It cracked on that, you know, on that line. So, be careful. The other thing, sometimes I've tried putting, like, even leaving it in a plastic bag or something, so that it doesn't dry out too fast. Because you're playing with, you want it to dry, but not too fast. Because if it's not dry, it's not going to hold its shape. So when you get it bent, however much it's going to bend, usually probably the first 24 hours are about how much it's going to bend. After that, it doesn't bend a whole lot more. But you need to leave it in that shape for, I'd say, at least a week, so that it has a chance to dry in that position and get good and dry before you take it off again, because otherwise it's just going to kind of spring right back again. So you want to, and as it, of course, with the tension here, as it moves, it'll keep the tension on, but sometimes you can put more on. Sometimes you can also, you know, like just put some on the end, if you can find the right place to keep them on. You got to back far enough they'll stay, and that'll help tension them up a little bit. If you really get a good bend, you'll get to a point where these side brackets are in the way. Then you'll have to either raise it up above the band maybe, so it's got room for it to move some more. And then, of course, whatever finish you like after that.
Do you ever use, in his video, did he use a light bulb for drying, for doing that?
Oops.
Oop, there it is.
Yeah.
That's what happens. Yeah, he does,
What's the purpose of the light bulb then?
to dry it faster.
To dry it faster, okay.
No,
See, that's drying it too fast. So.
yeah, I mean, if you watch his video, that thing is pretty near wrapped around itself within a few hours, and I've never had that happen. But the more it gets around, once you got your shape, then what he's basically doing is using the light bulb to dry it faster, so that he can take it out of the clamps. The other trick that he does is he calls these hat clamps, but they're just a piece like this where you can slide it over the brim. This is if you want to get a two-way bend going.
Do you ever add moisture back in your spray bottle?
I have, yeah. In fact, the one I've got going right now, I did that on. And I'm not so sure it helps much. I'm not going to do it on this because I don't want to take a chance on breaking that brim. But then you put rubber bands on here to pull that tight. And what you'll get is, besides the bend down this way, you'll get the front and back coming down.
Oh, okay.
So you got sides going up and front and back coming. More of the Ranger type hat. But I have not had good luck doing that. I can't, if I pull on that too much, then it doesn't want to go this way. So that's why I like to take his class, because I got a lot to learn about the fine points of the bending and stuff. But and then I'll just mention, Dick Singh was in here earlier when I was setting this up, and he says, well, I've never seen one like this. Well, you know, you don't turn that. What I did is I just left it thick on the inside so that I could carve on the outside. And I just used a rasp and a few other things, just whatever tools you got to take more wood off of there. For looks, you know, it looks fine. It's heavy, but the inside is nice and flat. If you're really brave and ambitious, you could somehow maybe with a Dremel or something try to clean all that out, but that would be a whole lot more work than I care to do.
None of it, turning it dry, steaming it, and bending it.
Yeah, I've thought about it. But then you have to make a steamer and get something to make steam with and the whole thing, if you've got that all set up already.
Wet wood turns easier to start with than dry wood.
Jim, have you ever turned ash with that for a Colway hat? Is that what they use, you know, like for bolts and stuff, it bends nice?
I don't think I have.
Ash?
Yeah, I don't think I have,
Try
but
it.
find me a piece.
I'll
And, you know, that's always the challenge, like I said, you know, to find a big enough
Right,
piece
that big.
that's fresh green.
But,
Or that'll
you use that
bend.
a lot for boat stripping,
Yeah,
bends very nice.
when it's thin.
Indians used to use for making baskets with black ash. They strip it off the lawn.
Don't know, I think most any wood would work, but you gotta,
That's probably the,
yeah. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, what do you do with all your money that you sell from these hats?
Buy more tools. Actually, we're moving up to Stevens Point shortly. We bought a house up there. Our daughter's up there, so we're moving. And
That's what you're doing with all the money you make.
I'm building a new shop. I'm not building; it's there. I got a 24 by 30 garage. That's going to be a freestanding building. That's going to be my shop. So most of the money that I've ever made is going to go into my exhaust system for that. So yeah, or more tools. There's always places to spend it. Somebody, as far as price-wise, somebody says, you know, Hannes will get thousands of dollars for his hats, and I'm not in that league. I have some at a art gallery in Lanesboro, Minnesota. If any of you know where that is.
You got some down here, okay.
And in fact, this fall they've sold 2 of my hats. I think they were 140 they sold them for. Of course, I don't get that because they get their cut.
In that art center in Lanesboro?
Cornucopia, Lanesboro Art Center, yeah.
That was nice.
Yeah.
There was some nice turning. Do you have other wood turnings in there then too?
And I've had bowls and stuff.
Yeah, I'll probably see them. That's
Right now, I think all I've got are 2 bowls, but she wants hats, but she wants perfect hats. And I don't have too many perfect
Did you
ones.
tell her to call him?
Yeah. They, you know, she doesn't like cracks and stuff, and
What kind of percentage
Sorry.
does a gallery like that get?
40,
40% or more.
Money.
yeah. So
Long end of the business.
Yeah.
these are for sale if you want to buy one. It's cheap.
Cheap.
$100 you can have any of them. Any other questions, comments?
Do you use
Does-
any special grinds on your,
This is, I started turning with an Ellsworth gouge. And that's about what I've always used, and I use his jig,
yep.
his standard shape. And you know, basically you can turn a whole hat
Yeah.
with that. Now, Hannes has a fancy special grind that he uses to get in better and so on. I haven't tried it just because I hate to take a gouge and mess it up like that. But
What's the name of the tool maker again?
Ellsworth is the
Oh, that's David.
label, David Ellsworth gouge. Craft Supplies has them. Most of
Taylor
the,
makes them that, don't they?
probably, it's one of those guys in England. But any of the catalogs have them.
Yeah.
But, you know, any bowl gouge.
Yeah. So I
Will
watched
work.
his video, that was 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so I watched you, and I think you did a real fine job. And a little bit simpler than what the video was. So thank you.
Yes. And there's no substitute for just try it.
Try it. So we would.
And like I said, you can try small ones if you don't want to do a big one. And
Right.
the only thing with a small one, then you need like smaller chuck and so on, and it's a little harder to get in there. But actually what he does, when he makes a hat, he cores out the inside and makes a mini hat. And then he also, when he takes the wood off the outside, he actually well, here. He's got a chunk of wood like this, okay, and this is what he's going to keep. He'll actually cut in this way, and he's chucking it down here, and this way, and he'll kick this piece, and he'll have a ring that he makes a mirror out of. So he doesn't waste any wood. I don't bother with that, but that's what he does. Anything else?
Are you looking for a new club when you move to Point?
Yeah, I will be.
In Wausau, and I hear they're just starting one in Point.
In Point?
They're just,
Oh, cool.
some of the art students are trying to start one.
Yeah, I looked on their website for AEW, and I saw there's Wausau. I know there's one over in it's Appleton area.
Yeah, Nina is
Madison.
because they're building.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Let me know if you try to make one. Send me a picture, or let me know how you came out. If you got any questions, but give it a try. The worst you can do is make firewood.